year-round, even when the summer sun baked the earth to powder. The rider stopped at the edge of her property, respecting the invisible line that frontier folk understood. He touched the brim of his hat. "Ma'am!" "Name's Gabriel Harper. Folks call me Trace. I'm hoping you might have room for a man and his horse to wait out that storm brewing west." Elise glanced toward the horizon, where dark clouds were piling up like dirty wool. Dust storm. Sure enough, they'd been coming more frequent lately ever since the railroad crew started tearing up the land 50 miles south. "This is a way station," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Room and board's $2 a night. Includes grain for your horse and supper. Payment in advance." He dismounted slow, like his bones hurt, and pulled a leather pouch from his coat. The way he moved, the way his coat hung. She'd seen enough men pass through to know he wore iron on his hip. Probably more than one piece, but his hands stayed clear of his weapons, and when he counted out the silver, he was careful to let her see he had exactly what he owed, nothing more. "Stable's there," she said, nodding toward the leaning structure. "Pumps inside, supper's in an hour." He led his horse away, and she noticed how he favored his left leg slightly, a man with old wounds. Then again, they all had them out here one way or another. Inside the cabin, Elise stirred the pot of stew and tried to quiet the unease crawling up her spine. It had been 3 months since Thomas died, 3 months of running the station alone, and every day brought new challenges. The latest was a series of letters from the county tax office, each one claiming higher amounts owed, each one signed by Sheriff Carl Anton, a man who'd never met a bribe he didn't like. She was setting the table when bootsteps sounded on the porch. But it wasn't the lone rider. Conrad Dietrich filled her doorway like bad news, his bulk wrapped in a coat that cost more than most folks saw in a year. Behind him, 3 men waited, blue bandanas tied loose around their necks, the railroad baron's calling card. "Mrs. Morrison," Dietrich said, removing his hat with mock courtesy. "I trust you've given thought to my generous offer." "The answer's still no," she said, keeping the table between them. "This station's not for sale." "Everything's for sale," he said, his smile never touching his eyes. "It's merely a question of price. The railroad's coming through, ma'am. This whole valley is going to change. You can be part of that change, or—" he shrugged, letting the thread hang unfinished. "Or what?" The new voice came from behind Dietrich. Trace stood in the doorway, cleaned up, but still dust-worn, his presence somehow filling more space than his lean frame should allow. "This is a private conversation," Dietrich snapped. "Not anymore," Trace said. He'd left his gun belt hanging by the door, but something in his stance suggested he didn't need it. "The lady said no. In my experience, that's a complete sentence." One of the blue bandana men shifted, hand drifting toward his weapon. Tracy's eyes flicked to him. "Just once, son. You'll want to think real careful about your next move." The tension stretched tight as fence wire. Then Dietrich laughed, a sound like gravel in a pan. "Boys, seems we've interrupted the ladies' supper." He placed his hat back on his head. "We'll continue this discussion another time, Mrs. Morrison." Quote, Soon they filed out, boots heavy on the porch boards. Through the window, Elise watched them mount up and ride off, dust devils spinning in their wake. "Thank you," she said, not turning around. "No need." Trace moved to the table, still favoring that left leg. Men like that, they're used to taking what they want. Sometimes they just need reminding that not everyone's selling. She served the stew in silence, both of them eating like folks who'd learned not to waste words. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the shutters. The dust storm would hit within the hour. "If you don't mind my asking," Trace said finally, "what's he want with a way station?" Elise pushed a piece of cornbread around her plate. "It's not the station, it's the water. This spring feeds from an underground river. My husband Thomas spent years mapping it, tracing where it runs." She stood, moving to the mantel, where a rolled paper sat between 2 books. "He believed it connects to others throughout the valley. Whoever controls the source controls everything," Trace finished. "And let me guess, that sheriff he mentioned is in his pocket." "Anton's been increasing our taxes every month," she said bitterly. Claims it's for territorial improvements, but everyone knows where that money really goes. A sudden gust slammed against the cabin, and the first wave of dust began pattering against the windows like tiny fists. Trace stood, testing his weight on that bad leg. Storm's here. I should check on the horses. Wait. Elise moved to a chest in the corner, pulling out an oilcloth coat. It was Thomas's. No sense letting it go to waste. He took it with a nod and headed into the growing tempest. Through the window she watched him work, efficient, despite the wind trying to knock him sideways. A man used to harsh conditions, used to working alone. When he returned, shaking dust from the coat, she had coffee waiting. They sat as the storm raged, the cabin creaking but holding firm. You Army? She asked. Once, after the war, did some marshalling. He shrugged. Then I didn't. She understood. Everyone had befores and afters out here. Things they'd been, things they'd lost, things they'd run from. A paper on the table caught his eye, one of Anton's tax notices. He studied it, frowning. This date's wrong. They've backdated it 3 months, to before Thomas died. Elisa's stomach turned cold. They're saying we owed it before. Oh, no, Trace said quietly, setting the paper down careful-like. If the taxes predate his death and they're not paid, they can claim abandonment, seize the property without compensation. Outside, something heavier than wind struck the stable wall. They both tensed, listening. Then came the sound of horses, multiple riders. Stay inside, Trace said, but she was already moving, grabbing the shotgun from beside the door. Through the dust-hazed darkness, she could make out shapes, men working at her stable door. The blue bandanas showed pale in the swirling gloom. That's far enough, she called, shouldering the shotgun. They turned, and she recognized one. Pike, Dietrich's main enforcer, a man who enjoyed his work too much. Just checking on our horses, ma'am, he said, grin flashing white. Needed shelter from the storm. Plenty of shelter elsewhere. Move on. Now that's not neighborly, Pike drawled. Mr. Dietrich would be disappointed. I'll live with his disappointment. She kept the shotgun steady, though her arms were starting to shake. Movement to her left, another rider trying to flank. Then Trace was there, materializing from the shadows like smoke. The flanking rider went down hard, clutching his wrist. Gun hands broken, Trace said conversationally. Who's next? Pike's grin faded. He looked between them, calculating odds. Whatever he saw in Trace's face made him decide. Mount up, boys. We're done here. They collected their injured companion and rode off into the storm. Trace picked up the dropped pistol, emptying its chambers into the dirt. Back inside, Elise set the shotgun down with trembling hands. They'll be back. Yes, Trace said, testing the door's bar. But not tonight. Storm will keep them busy. She made more coffee, needing something to do with her hands. Why help me? She asked. You don't know me. He was quiet for a long moment. Maybe because I've been on the other side of men like Dietrich. Maybe because I'm tired of watching them win. He met her eyes. Or maybe because anyone who stands their ground with a shotgun against 4 armed men deserves a fighting chance. The storm howled on, and they sat in companionable silence. 2 strangers bound by circumstance and the understanding that come morning everything would change. The morning sun painted Thornbrush Station in shades of gold and rust as Elise hitched up the wagon. Trace was already checking the horses, moving with the easy efficiency of a man who'd spent half his life in a saddle. They'd agreed over breakfast. If Anton was coming with papers, they needed to file their own challenge first. Road to town's rough, she said, securing the last buckle, especially after a storm. I've ridden worse. He swung up onto his bay mare with barely a grimace. Question is, will they even let us file once we get there? Quote. She climbed onto the wagon seat, gathering the reins. We have to try. It's that, or start packing. The 20-mile journey to Cedar Ridge took most of the morning. The storm had carved new gullies in the road, and twice they had to stop to clear fallen branches. Trace rode ahead, scouting for trouble, occasionally circling back to help navigate the worst spots. By noon, the town's wooden building shimmered in the distance through a haze of dust. Cedar Ridge wasn't much. One main street, a few cross lanes, and buildings that looked like they'd been thrown up in a hurry and painted as an afterthought. But it had a courthouse, a land office, and most importantly, a telegraph line that connected to the territorial capital. They left the wagon at the livery and walked to the courthouse, Elise clutching her portfolio of documents. The streets were busier than usual. She recognized several ranchers from outlying properties. Word traveled fast in the territory. Inside the land office, Clerk Josiah Winters looked up from his ledger, his face going pale when he saw them. "Mrs. Morrison, I wasn't expecting you." "I need to file a challenge to the tax assessment," she said, placing the portfolio on his desk, "and register this survey map for the water rights." Winters glanced toward the door, nervous as a rabbit. "I'm afraid that's not possible. Sheriff Anton was here this morning. He said all matters regarding Thornbrush Station are to go through him first." "Since when does the sheriff run the land office?" Trace asked quietly. "Since—" Winters stopped, swallowing hard. "Please, I've got a family. I can't." The door banged open. Sheriff Carl Anton filled the frame, his star glinting on his vest, hand resting casual-like on his pistol. Well, the widow Morrison and her new friend," he drawled, eyes narrowing on Trace. "Don't believe we've been properly introduced." "Gabriel Harper," Trace said, not offering his hand. Anton rolled the name around like he was tasting it. "You wouldn't be the same Harper who had that unpleasantness down in Colorado? Something about a marshal's badge that went missing along with some evidence?" Quote. Trace's expression didn't change. "Must be thinking of someone else." "Must be," Anton said, his smile thin as wire. "Now, Mrs. Morrison, I believe we have business to discuss. My office." "Whatever you have to say can be said here," Elise replied. "I wasn't asking." Two deputies appeared behind Anton, hands hovering near their weapons. The threat was clear. In the sheriff's office, Anton didn't bother with pleasantries. He spread a document on his desk, official-looking, with the territorial seal. "Seizure notice. You've got 3 days to vacate." "On what grounds?" Elise kept her voice level. "Failure to pay taxes, abandonment of property," Anton said, leaning back, enjoying himself, "and suspicion of harboring fugitives." "That's a lie. You know it." "Is it?" Anton's eyes flicked to Trace. "How well do you know your new friend, Mrs. Morrison? Men drift through these parts for all sorts of reasons. Some running to something, some running from." Before anyone could respond, shouting erupted outside. Through the window, Elise saw smoke rising from the direction of the market square. Anton cursed, heading for the door. "Watch them," he told his deputies, but the distraction had already served its purpose. A young woman slipped through the back door, Grace Hamilton, the schoolteacher, though something in her bearing suggested more than chalk dust and primers. "You need to see Dr. Hartwell," she said quickly, pressing a small card into Elise's hand. "Back door of his office. 10 minutes." Then she was gone, quick as she'd come. The deputies were distracted by the smoke and shouts outside. Trace knocked over a chair, creating another diversion, and in the confusion they slipped out. Dr. Edwin Hartwell's office smelled of carbolic and whiskey. The doctor himself looked haggard, his usually steady hands trembling as he stitched up a farmer's gashed arm. "Dietrich's men," the farmer grunted, "tried to burn us out. My Sarah fought them off with a pitchfork, but they said they'd be back." Hartwell finished the stitching, then turned to Elise. "I need to tell you something about Thomas." Quote, Elise's heart clenched. "You were there when he died. You said it was an accident." "I said what they told me to say." The doctor pulled out a flask, hands shaking worse now. "They have my daughter Emma at Dietrich's ranch. Said if I didn't cooperate." He took a long pull. Thomas didn't fall from his horse. There were marks on his neck, bruises that looked like someone held him down. "Dear God," Elise whispered. Trace's jaw tightened. "Who did it?" Quote, "I don't know. Dietrich's orders. Anton's men, maybe. I'm sorry." Before Elise could respond, something fell from Hartwell's pocket. A key with Dietrich's ranch brand etched in the metal. The doctor quickly snatched it up, but not before she'd seen. "It's for Emma," he said desperately. in case I need to get to her quickly. Elise placed a hand on his arm. We'll get her back. But first, we need to survive the next 3 days. They left through the back door, Elise's mind reeling. Thomas murdered, Emma held hostage. How deep did this conspiracy run? At the market square, the earlier commotion became clear. Someone had set fire to Walter Kemp's wagon, retaliation for his wife's pitchfork defense. Townsfolk formed a bucket brigade, but the damage was done. "This is what happens," a voice said behind them. Elise turned to find Grace Hamilton again, this time holding a primer like she'd been teaching when the fire started. When people resist. But Grace's eyes told another story entirely. She glanced meaningfully at the telegraph office across the square. Inside, the telegraph operator was conveniently absent. Grace moved to the key with practiced ease. "I have friends in the capital," she said, fingers flying over the device. "Friends who are very interested in certain land grabs and water rights schemes." "You're not just a teacher," Trace observed. Grace smiled tightly. "I teach many lessons, some with books, some with other tools." She finished her message, then turned to them. "Help is coming, but it'll take time. You need to hold out." They made their way back to the livery, only to find trouble waiting. Pike and 3 of Dietrich's blue bandana boys were examining their wagon. "Afternoon, Mrs. Morrison," Pike drawled. "Shame about Kemp's wagon. Hate to see the same thing happen here." "Step away from my property," Elise said. "Or what?" Pike moved closer, whiskey harsh on his breath. "You'll get your broke-down gunfighter to stop me?" "Yeah, we know all about you, Harper." "Washed-up drunk who couldn't even keep his own partner alive." Trace went very still. "That's enough." "Is it? What are you going to do? Draw on me? Your hands shake too bad to hit anything these days." What happened next was too fast for Elise to follow. Pike went for his gun, but Trace was already moving. Not for his weapon, but for Pike himself. The bigger man went down hard, gasping for air, his gun spinning away in the dust. "Hands don't shake when I'm not holding iron," Trace said quietly. "Remember that." The other 3 backed away, helping Pike to his feet. "This ain't over," Pike wheezed. "No," Trace agreed, "but it is for today." They left town as the sun peaked, wagon wheels raising dust. Neither spoke for the first few miles, both processing what they'd learned. Finally, Elise broke the silence. "Colorado?" Trace kept his eyes on the horizon. "Different life. Partner got killed because I trusted the wrong people. Evidence I'd gathered against a corrupt judge disappeared along with my faith in the law." He glanced at her. "Been drifting since. And now I'm thinking maybe running isn't the answer. Maybe standing and fighting is." They were 5 miles from Thornbrush when they found the road blocked, not by Dietrich's men, but by Indians. Comanche, from the look of them, led by a man whose bearing marked him as a chief. Elise's hand went to the shotgun, but Trace stopped her. "Wait." The leader rode forward. "I am Nathan Graywolf. We need to talk." "About what?" Elise asked. "About water," Graywolf said. "And about how we might help each other keep it from men who would steal it from us all." The sun was setting by the time they reached Thornbrush Station, their escort of Comanche warriors peeling away at the property line. The talk with Graywolf had been brief, but powerful. He knew Dietrich's men were planning something bigger than land grabs, a dam in Devil's Canyon that would choke off the valley's water and destroy both ranchers and tribes alike. Inside, Elise lit the lamps while Trace barred the door. They had allies now, perhaps, but also larger enemies than they'd ever imagined. "Dietrich's not just after my spring," she said, studying Thomas's old map spread across the table. "He's after control of every drop of water in this valley." Trace accepted the coffee she handed him. No wonder he's willing to burn out families. Whoever owns the water owns the future. Outside, the night wind moaned through the eaves, carrying the promise of another storm. 2 days left, Elise said softly. 2 days, Trace echoed. Better make them count. She looked at him then, really looked, this stranger who'd arrived in a dust storm and somehow become her only ally. There was something steady in his gaze, something that told her he'd stand beside her no matter how bad it got. "Thank you," she said, "for today. For everything." Quote. He raised his coffee in a small salute. "Ask me again in 2 days, if we're still standing." The next morning dawned sharp and clear. The heat returned with a vengeance as Trace helped Walter Kemp repair his burned wagon. They'd been at it since sunrise, hauling water for neighbors whose wells had turned to mud. Dust clung to his skin until it gleamed copper under the sun. When he stripped off his shirt to wipe his face, Elise caught herself looking longer than she meant to and quickly busied herself with chores. Later, when the work was done, Trace said he'd checked the western fence line. "Saw riders earlier," he said. "Could be Dietrich's men." "Be careful," she told him. The words came out softer than she intended. The day stretched hot and still. When she finally heard splashing from the river bend, she followed the sound, half expecting trouble. The path wound through willows and cottonwoods, and there, in the glow of sunset, she stopped short. Trace was in the river, bare to the waist at first, then all the way in. The water reached his hips, glowing gold beneath the setting sun. He was washing off the day's grime, unaware she was there. The light made his scars stand out, pale lines against tanned skin, each one a story written in flesh. For a moment, she couldn't move. He looked like a man carved from the land itself, weathered, scarred, unbroken. Then a branch cracked beneath her foot. Trace spun, hand flying instinctively toward where his gun would have hung. Their eyes met, hers wide, his startled, then softening. Neither spoke for a heartbeat. "Elise," he said quietly, water lapping around him. "I thought I heard something." I heard a splash," she managed. "Thought maybe trouble." "No trouble," he said, "just washing off the dust." She turned to go, but stopped when he added, "You don't have to leave." She hesitated, then faced him again. "Thomas used to come here," she said this was the most peaceful spot in the territory. "I can see why," Trace said, and his voice had a gentleness she hadn't heard before. The sky burned orange, then deepened toward purple. Wind stirred the cottonwood leaves, whispering secrets. The moment felt suspended between earth and sky. "The water," she said, needing something to say. "It stays cool all year, fed by the spring." "Perfect," he said. Then, after a beat, "The temperature, I mean." Despite herself, she smiled. "I know what you meant." He ducked under again, surfacing with slicked-back hair and water dripping from his jaw. When he opened his eyes, the guardedness was gone. There was something raw there. The same loneliness she'd seen in her own reflection too many nights. "I've been alone 3 months," she said suddenly. The words spilled before she could stop them. 3 months of pretending I'm strong, of doing what everyone expects a widow to do. I'm tired of feeling empty." Trace's voice was low. "You're not empty, Elise. You're surviving." She met his gaze. "And you? What are you doing?" "Trying to remember what it feels like to stop running." For a long time neither spoke. The sound of the river filled the silence. Then from the trees came the faint click of a hammer being drawn back. "Well, ain't this cozy?" Pike stood on the bank with 2 of Dietrich's men, guns drawn, grins mean as snakes. "Spying on ladies now?" Trace said, not moving. "That's low even for you, Pike." "Just making sure nothing improper's happening," Pike sneered. "Wouldn't want the sheriff to hear about the widow entertaining a stranger. Of course, we could forget what we saw for a price." Trace's tone went cold. "Name it." "The map," Pike said. "Thomas Morrison's water survey. Hand it over, and maybe we forget about this little scene." Elise's hands clenched. "You killed my husband for that map. You think I'll just give it to you?" "Careful with accusations, widow," Pike warned, raising his gun. "Talk like that could get you hurt." What happened next happened fast. Trace moved, not toward Pike, but sideways, placing himself between her and the gun. The first shot cracked, echoing across the canyon. Then chaos exploded. From the trees came a chorus of wild cries. Comanche war calls slicing through the evening air. Nathan Greywolf and his warriors appeared from nowhere, bows drawn. Pike's men panicked, firing wild, then bolting for their horses. Pike froze, caught between fight and flight. Greywolf rode forward, calm as a shadow. "You're on treaty land," he said evenly. "My treaty with the Morrison family. That makes you trespassers." "Indians can't hold white man's paper," Pike spat. "No," another voice said sharply, "but federal marshals can." Grace Hamilton stepped from behind the trees, rifle in hand, her badge glinting in the sun. "Special Deputy U.S. Marshal Catherine Reed," she said, "investigating land fraud and murder. Pike, you and your men are under arrest." Pike's face went white. "You're bluffing." Grey Wolf's arrowhead pressed against his throat. "Try her," he murmured. Pike's gun hit the dirt. "You'll hang for this," he muttered. "No," Grace said. "You will." When it was over, Grey Wolf's men escorted Pike's group away toward the reservation to await the circuit judge. Catherine lowered her rifle, glancing at Trace. "You have a habit of being in the middle of trouble, Harper." "Trouble seems to have good aim," he said dryly. As the warriors disappeared into the dusk, Elise and Trace stood by the riverbank, the air thick with the scent of sage and smoke. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You'd have done the same," he replied. "Yes," she said simply. "I would have." They walked back to the station in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now, one filled with something tender and new. At the porch, Trace stopped. "Elise, what you saw back there, in the river." She smiled faintly. "A man washing off the day. Nothing more." They both knew it wasn't nothing. It was everything they hadn't said yet. "Tomorrow Anton comes," he said. "I know," she answered. "It's going to get worse before it gets better. Then we'll face it together." She hesitated, then touched his arm. "When you stood between me and Pike, I saw who you really are. Not a drifter, not a broken man, but someone who still remembers how to protect what's right." Quote. Trace looked away, the hardness in his face softening. "Maybe you remind me who that man was." She nodded. "Then, let's make sure he stays." That night, as stars blazed above the quiet valley, Trace sat by the door with his rifle across his knees, keeping watch. Elise lay awake in the loft, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing below.